Welcome to Pandemic, ladies and gentlemen. Are we comfortable? Anybody need us to turn up the heat? Welcome to Pandemic. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, and I want a piece of it. There is an ancient Chinese curse that you might live in interesting times, and that we certainly have. And the Mandarin character for crisis is a unique marriage of two Mandarin characters, danger and opportunity, to remind us that wherever there is danger, there is always opportunity. And fortune always favors the bold. So be bold. You have been chosen, ladies and gentlemen, as a project management team to develop a solution for a pandemic pathogen that has infected over 34 million Americans and that has been attributed to the deaths of over 607,000, most of whom have been the elderly in nursing homes, a known risk from the very beginning. But today there is a new product, the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. So let me explain how you will be evaluated in this pandemic apprentice project management simulation. Without further ado. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for Arlington Public School Board. And this is a truly very unique school board race because last year every school board across the nation was basically selected to appear on a reality television show version of the Apprentice Pandemic Edition. But it was not just a test for public school boards, principals, and administrators, determining their mastery of basic middle school science and high school math, but also a test for American business leaders and men of the cloth in places of worship, that extra republic contemplated by founders like James Madison to frame the conscience of what John Adams had described as a religious and moral people for which our Constitution was written, not suitable for any other kind. And in this public health crisis, ladies and gentlemen, testing their intellect, their moral conscience, and even, dare I say, their eternal souls, and indeed testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, might long endure. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as in the performing arts, there are no small parts, but only small actors. And in pandemic, boys and girls, all the world has been our stage, with history but just one final arbiter for our grand performances of a lifetime, in a lifetime production, as but bit players in an enormous ensemble cast, speaking our, and even singing their lines, strutting and fretting their hour upon the global stage until that pandemic was heard no more. It is that tale told by that idiot, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing in many a regard. Are we having a good time? Are we enjoying the show? Coffee is for closers, gentlemen. Sweetheart, grab me some coffee, and maybe some of those donuts. You know the ones I like. But at least in this scene, in an act, in a larger drama placed in a setting with the nation's capital just across the Potomac as a backdrop behind us, for a congressional district that is home to the Pentagon, Fort Belvoir, Joint Base Maya Anderson Hall, and more civilian and military federal employees than any other congressional district in the nation. According to the latest poll, 53% of military dependents and families are reluctant to be administered the virus, but they are under great pressure by bad people, very bad people, to simply comply, especially after a recent announcement that the Department of Defense, and particularly Army Secretary Christine Wormuth, and the Department of Army have been considering mandatory vaccines, along with Dennis McDonough, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, who has considered mandatory vaccinations for the almost half of VA employees who have not yet volunteered to be administered the vaccine, especially with over 280, almost 200 fatalities to a novel coronavirus at the D.C. Veterans Medical Center. So let's once again talk about mandatory vaccines for members of the active military force, but also our veterans. While serving as a commander in the reserve component with a mission to support initial entry training, IET soldiers, I had the unique opportunity to receive certification in the Train the Trainer course on composite risk management, where one takeaway was that unidentified and unmanaged hazards and their associated risks impede successful Army missions, undermine readiness, decrease morale, and deplete resources. If you're doing the wrong thing, you're going to be inefficient. And yesterday I had the opportunity to present correspondence to senior officials at DOD to remind those leaders that our leaders will accept no unnecessary risks. This is guidance straight from DA PAM 385-30, titled Safety Risk Management, published December 2nd, 2014. In our correspondence, we reminded senior Defense Department officials that under DA PAM 385-30, safety, risk management, and accident prevention are commanders, managers, and individual responsibilities. We reminded them that under DA PAM 385-30, risk management provides consistent and systematic identification and communication of risks, consequences, and potential actions to mitigate those risks to appropriate commanders for an acceptance decision. We reminded them that under DA PAM 385-30, by applying the principles of risk management when identifying hazards associated with suicide, sexual assault, and PMV accident prevention, commanders can take the initiative to identify and mitigate risks associated with these hazardous behaviors and situations before they impact our units. And we reminded them that under DA PAM 385-30, leaders utilize real-time risk management in order to assess the risks, develop controls, and implement those controls in order to mitigate the risks. It is a very active process, this thing called leadership. And we reminded them that under DA PAM 385-30, all military leaders recognize that the risk assessment consists of the first two steps of the risk management process. In step one, individuals identify the hazards that may be encountered in executing an activity. In step two, they determine the impact of each hazard on the activity. The risk assessment provides for enhanced situational awareness. Stay alert, stay alive. This awareness builds confidence and allows soldiers, units, Army civilians, and organizations to implement timely, efficient, and effective protective control measures. Step 3 through 5 are the essential follow-through actions to manage risk effectively. In these steps, leaders balance risks against costs and take appropriate actions to eliminate unnecessary risks and accept residual risk at the appropriate level during execution. Leaders continuously assess the risk to the overall mission and to those involved in the task. Finally, leaders and individuals evaluate the effectiveness of controls and provide lessons learned so that others may benefit from the experience. This is DA PAM 385-30. Anyone in the military should know this, especially a leader. And in a simple cost-benefit analysis, it is axiomatic that if active duty members of the military have experienced 3 times more fatalities associated with being administered the vaccines than from being infected by COVID-19, accepting no unacceptable risk compulsory COVID-19 vaccines is simply unacceptable. Are there any objections? If so, you're fired. In our correspondence to senior leaders at the Department of Defense, we highlighted the anomaly presented in DOD infection cases that had found soldiers 2 times more likely to be infected than a resident of the Commonwealth of Virginia, but far less likely to be hospitalized or to become a fatality, enjoying a 0.01% case fatality rate. A low case fatality rate shared by DOD dependents, less than 1/3 of whom reside in government housing. residing primarily in the open economy with just about everybody else, and also shared by DoD contractors and civilians, alongside whom soldiers spend the majority of their waking day. And if this is simply the pathology of a mutant variant strain that has affected only those associated with the military, somehow those same unique characteristics would reasonably be anticipated to be enjoyed by resident patients in veteran care facilities, as well as workers at those locations, many of whom are also veterans. But 12,457 deaths to date attributed to COVID-19 among veteran residents diagnosed at VA facilities, and fatalities among staff at each facility affected not exceeding 6 in the worst states. This is obviously not the case, and validates a pattern of infection that is wholly consistent with a biological agent being deployed based upon tactical and strategic considerations, just like such a pathogen that prompted the emergency declaration by the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary to issue the emergency use authorization that cannot be used to address a communicable disease being transmitted from person to person, but can only be used to address a biological agent being deployed against targets of national security interest, like active duty members of the military, who have a risk of infection 2 times higher than a resident of Virginia. Under Kuhn's unified theory of anomalies, if there is one explanation that resolves all anomalies, it is probably the correct one. Did I disturb your freaking concentration? You're fired. Do I have your attention? To pierce the veil of immunity under the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, PrEP Act, which provides immunity to qualified individuals who have been exempted from regulations that would otherwise render them unable to prescribe, dispense, or administer vaccines as authorized by the state or U.S. territory. They are approved for doing in an emergency situation. This talk about it not being approved is ridiculous. They are approved for an emergency situation. But in order to pierce that veil of immunity, a showing of willful misconduct higher than gross negligence and even recklessness would be required by a clear and convincing evidence to substantiate allegations such as fraudulent misrepresentations, to include representations that COVID-19 or even the Delta variant is a highly contagious disease, which a validated less than 5% infectious pathogen is simply not under the science. Unable to even set off a super spreader event, something we've known since the 1980s, being empirically 12 times too low for such an occurrence to occur or recur. Moreover, the existence of a biological agent being deployed against targets of national security interest, and not merely a communicable disease being transmitted from person to person, would have been required to trigger use of both the Emergency Use Authorization and the Defense Production Act, and any statement to the contrary would constitute fraud as a matter of law. This is the case that must be brought to overcome regulatory deference under Chevron v. NRDC, where a regulator as an expert is expected to know that which is right, and only a showing that they are clearly wrong or doing something wrong, not pursuing a legitimate state interest, is required to win that case on the merits. Do I have your attention? I know that you're interested. Have you made your decision for Christ? Action. You're fired. Maybe folks were just too panicked about large and growing numbers and forgot all about how those numbers were being caused to grow. You think? Obviously not. You're fired. 95% of businesses fail. Give less than 5% chance of getting COVID-19. Are you a loser?
are your women. This briefing is unclassified, as you will. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for Arlington Public School Board. Honest as you are.
Cry glorious havoc, let slip the dogs of war. My friend, unless your daddy happens to own the railroad, we're going to enjoy a very brief acquaintance. You still here? I told you, you're fired. Go away. Hey, sugar, where's my coffee?
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
You're fired.